less American.
Could you just tell us what years this was?
I was 15, so 69. So when I came back to the United States, I was really a fish out of water. I wasn't Turkish, I wasn't American. All of my old friends, I no longer had them as friends, and I was trying to realize who I really was, what was all this Turkishness all about, and that was the beginning of my understanding of my Turkishness and my Jewishness. My family, my mother and father, slowly collected their other relatives to come to the United States. Her sister Ida, my uncle Niso, my father's cousin, all these people came to the United States and were actually the nexus of Turkish society in the Washington area. And the American Turkish Association became a big part of our lives here. There were big parties. If you watch the show Mad Men, that's how everybody dressed. Mini skirts and the cigarettes and the cocktail parties. That was a big part of my parents' life in the 1960s. If you ask me, how did they raise us? They raised us both religions. We did Passover, we did Hanukkah. My father wore a yarmulke. They took us to the mosque. We prayed on the floor. It didn't matter. It all seemed perfectly normal and reasonable to us. What was not normal was trying to become American, because culturally, the Jews in Turkey and the Turks in Turkey are culturally very similar. And that's the one thing that I've noticed since writing this book, that Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardi Jews, Jews from Spain, are not nearly as similar to one another in many ways as the Sephardic Jews and Arabs, which is, I think, something that we could discuss when I finish. I'm sure that we're going to talk a lot about things. Let's see. So people ask me, well, are you Turkish, are you Muslim, or are you Jewish? And when I think about that, if I answer one way or another, I would have to deny half of this book. I would have to deny one of my parents. And I really don't see a reason that I have to do that, why I have to exclude either one. Because both religions believe in one God. We share so many of the same holidays, so many of the feelings of social justice, feelings of respect for God and respect for family, and wanting our kids to be educated. All of that is very, very similar. And I don't see a reason that I have to choose between one and the other. Then people say to me, oh, well, this is so wonderful. You're a symbol of what is great in the world, where Muslims and Jews get along in loving harmony. That's not the case at all. Our house really was a Mideast crisis every night. It was a lot of arguing, a lot of fighting. My mother, would call him an Ethiopian barbarian, Abyssinian, whatever, and he would call her a hedonistic, joy-loving, dance-loving woman, and that was all very, very true. My father was a typical Ottoman Turk. He wanted her to stay home and be more quiet and cook nice foods, and she wanted to be at the Kennedy Center. She wanted to go to dances. She used to sneak us into the Uptown Theater. She was a great con artist. She was the best con artist on the planet. I mean, if you read this book, and I hope you will, you'll find that she's a very, very interesting woman. When she ran off with my father, she was only 17, he was 35. And when her father found out about it, he knew that his family's reputation was on the line. So he took my father and he was put in jail. Yeah. And then when he was taken to court, for, I guess you call it statutory rape if you're with a woman who's underage, they were going to find him guilty of statutory rape until a little 17-year-old Jewish girl walked in through the back of the courtroom, and she loves to tell this story. I walked in, I do her accent, I'm sorry, she likes it, so it's okay. She says, "He did not steal me, I wanted to go with him, I am in love." So there was nothing that they could do, and so they left together. And it was sort of like that for the rest of their lives together. They were passionate, they were irreverent, they fought, and they loved each other desperately. And they taught us something about how people who are really different from one another can really still love each other. And even though they fight, even though they disagree, they can still be respectful at a certain point. And I think that that's the main lesson that I've learned. It's about tolerance. If you ask me what I think about what is going on in the world between Muslims and Jews, first of all, I'm very heartened to see groups like yours. Every time I do this, I start crying, but your being here really affects me. because I feel like there's hope, because I see both sides of this equation. I see racism in both sides of my family, and people talk about the other side as if I'm not there. And I don't think that's right. And the one thing I've learned about Mitt Romney's talk about the 47% is that when you're talking to a group of people who you think are your friends, you should really talk as if your enemies are in the room. And I'm going to start living my life like that. So that's the first half of the book. I trace where the Turks came from, how they started in Manchuria and became nomads across Central Asia, how my father's family ended up fighting the Persians, ended up in Trabzon on the Black Sea, and then traveled to Istanbul. And also the next chapter is about the Jews and how we started in Palestine, how we were part of the diaspora, how we ended up, in Spain, how Spain was the center of the world of knowledge and education, along with the Muslims, along with the Christians, until they were kicked out of Spain by Queen Isabel in 1492. And were accepted by the lovely Sultan from Turkey, and that's how the Jews made their way to the Ottoman Empire, and that's how my mother ended up in Istanbul to meet my dad. That's the first half of the book. The second half of the book are the 101 recipes that we brought with us, because my parents love to cook and they love to eat. So I don't know if you've seen this, but every recipe in here, let me just open one thing. It not only has the recipe, but it has a Star of David or a crescent or both to show, do the Jews make this, do the Muslims make this, or is it a little of both? And then step-by-step pictures, because most people don't know what these foods are supposed to taste like. I have to tell you, Turkish cuisine is delicious. And people come to me and they say, well, you said it was delicious, but you didn't say delicious, because it's really, really delicious. So, and most of the recipes are vegetarian, and most of them, if they have meat, have very little meat, so I think that you'll really enjoy that. And none of them are particularly hard. So I hope that you really cook some of the foods if you've bought the book. People are also sending me pictures, not of themselves, but of their food, which is kind of funny, but it also makes me feel really good. A couple of things I'd like to tell you is that my Tante Ida, who was mentioned earlier, 2 years ago, she and I prepared some of these recipes together. She now has frontotemporal dementia, and so she's not really able to even eat on her own. Her two daughters came to me and they said, you know, Uncle Leon, her husband, really loves these borequitas, and we don't know how to make it anymore. Can you show us how to make it? So we went to the book and we used the recipe that Tante Ida taught me. I showed them how to make this recipe. They took it home to their dad, and he almost started crying. And he said, this is exactly how I remember it. And that makes me feel really good. That's one of the reasons that I wrote this book, to keep these traditions alive. 3 years ago, when the economy tanked and I was no longer able to find a lot of work in architecture, I was twiddling my thumbs. I was driving my husband crazy. And I realized my sons don't know anything about Turkey, don't know anything about Jewish, don't know anything about Islam. I have to save the story of where we came from, what we're all about, what we eat, why we eat it, and that's why I wrote the book. And I think that's really all I have to say. I'd love to entertain any questions. And, Thank you. So, yes.
So when you said that you were in Turkey and you became more Turkish than American, what did you take in that you felt was Turkish, and why? And how long were you there for this transformation to take place?
I was there for 6 weeks, and I finally came to understand that I was not a queer person, I was just an immigrant. There had been so many things that I found about myself that were different in this culture, and I didn't quite understand why. When we were in elementary school, my sister Chai and I were in the same class, and the teacher would say, what did you have for breakfast today? And everybody would say, pancakes. You know, oh, we had eggs. And my sister and I would say, we had caviar. And we'd end up in the principal's office for exaggerating. But we really did have caviar. You know, my mother used to take us to the cinema, and she would pack hard-boiled eggs and tomatoes and bread, and we would have a little picnic in the movie theater. And it was perfect for us, but it was very different, and we knew subconsciously that there was something very different. But nobody told me what that was. And I didn't realize what it was until I went to Turkey. And I realized, oh, Oh, I'm just an immigrant. I'm not weird. I'm just an immigrant. So, yes, please.
Your dad took you to Turkey when he found you holding hands with a boy.
Right.
How long were you in Turkey, and what was his thought process to allow you to come back to the States?
Well, when I first arrived there, I wrote a letter to my boyfriend. Oh, by the way, I found out that I had a brother in Turkey. Didn't know that. So I gave him the letter and I said, please send this to the United States. It's to my boyfriend. And the next day, my father gave me the letter. And it was opened. And right, so in the beginning, he definitely was not going to take me back until my miraculous change. But when I came back, I did want to be with my boyfriend and my old friends, but I just couldn't. I found that I had sort of been out of the fishbowl. I couldn't get back in. I found that they really had no idea what I was talking about. When I came in and they came back and they asked me a question, I went, and they would ask me again, and they would ask me again, I'd go. Just that very, very subtle body language, it made me feel like, again, a weirdo, an immigrant, somebody really different. And I started, do you understand what that is?
Well, no. I'd like you to say.
This is, no. This is, could you repeat that? I didn't understand. So if you go like this, people repeat the question. So it's that kind of very subtle body language that creates all kinds of disconnects in communication for immigrants, and it's a problem for young people. I also tell people that it's very, very difficult to insult Americans. Not because you can't try to insult them, but Americans don't notice when they're being insulted unless you hammer them over the head with an insult. You know, if I came up to you and I said, hi, how are you, and held out my left hand, that is an insult. I'm telling him secretly, I'm kind of mad at you. You better check what you've done, because I'm offering my left hand. Do you understand? Or if I'm sitting next to you and I sort of have my back, it's a way of saying, I don't respect you today, something's wrong. And it's a way of you to correct without us actually having to be face to face saying, you did this, you did that. It's a much softer kind of approach. And it's that kind of communication that sort of falls apart diplomatically between United States, Israel, Turkey, that kind of stuff that causes a lot of problems without intention. I forgot the question. Oh, we were in Turkey for 6 weeks, and I learned Turkish. I was speaking Turkish fluently when I came back. And since then, I've been relearning it, learning more and more.
And how did your dad feel about you coming back?
He knew we had to come back. He knew that I understood him, finally. I understood why he wanted me to wear dresses. I understood why he would cry if I served tea to our guests. Here's your tea, hello, and I would do it for him because it brought back some Turkish old thing that he had grown up with. And I realized that if I do this for him, he will be so, so happy, that I will sort of be preserving part of who he is. Like I hope my sons cook like this to preserve part of who I am. We all hope that from our children. He knew he had me. Yes.
You're raising your sons with 2 traditions from your side, and then there must be another 1 or 2 or more backgrounds that you have to mix with that.
Right.
How hard is it?
It's really hard if you try to control it. I think, you know, if you try to force your kids to be a certain religion, you're not sure they'll internalize anything. My children have gone through, finally, thank God, they finished their atheist phase, and now they're, as we all did, all right, I did. And they're sort of searching now. My husband, Bruce, is Ashkenazi Jew. So they see us do the candles on, yes, with the striped shirt, the handsome guy. They see us do, you know, the Shabbat candles. And they see us go to synagogue here and there. They also see that in our family we have girls who wear hijab. My friends Barbara and David Block know most of my family. They know many people in our family wear hijab. They see us do Christmas, but we put a crescent and star on the tree. Yeah. And it's all sort of mishmashed. And I think it's teaching them the lesson of tolerance, that it's possible. That you don't really have to give up who you are to still, you know, accept things from other people. Yes.
Could you say something about language, especially growing up? You mentioned Ladino and then Turkish and...
Yeah.
But also, earlier when you were speaking, you said maybe we'll get back to the Sephardic, Ashkenazi, Arab.
Yeah. We did grow up multilingual. My mother spoke 5 languages. My father spoke you know, 5 languages, and 2 of them were not subsets of the other. I'm sorry for the mathematic metaphor. But how can I say this? We learned almost every language as we were growing up, and I'm shocked actually at how little Americans know of other languages. Joie de vivre sort of confounds people. That's very sad. But the thing about Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews, I'm doing a program in November, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. It's called A Visit to Turkey with Tikvat Israel. I don't know if you've heard about that. And most of the people in that synagogue are Ashkenazi. And they have what I have found, and okay, I'm not an expert, I'm not a professional at this, so this is only my observation. It seems to me that they have a sort of fear of Arabs that Sephardic Jews don't have. They don't have a history of living with Arabs, living with Muslims that Sephardic Jews have. And so I feel like the chasm between Ashkenazi Jews and the Muslim world is much wider than between the Sephardic world and the other two. Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazi Jews don't eat the same food. We don't eat gefilte fish. We don't even know what that is. My husband says shmata, and I say, I don't know what that is. I don't speak Yiddish. And he says, what kind of Jew are you? You know, so, you know, so it's like that.
Yeah, a couple of observations that tie into that. One, that I'm an Orthodox Christian, and the Eastern Church has a different relationship to Muslims than the West.
Right.
And secondly, that when I've spent time in Iran talking with Jews there, it was a surprise to me to find that there were no distinctions. I mean, they didn't talk in terms of Sephardic or Ashkenazi or anything else, or Reform or Conservative or Orthodox.
Right.
They were just Jews, and they've been in Iran since they left Babylon.
Right, since whenever.
The Mizrahi Jews, we found that out going to a course on Judaism at the 6th and I Historic Synagogue. And the question came up because they've never been in Spain.
Right.
They've never been in Germany. They've never left the Middle East. And we found out that they're Mizrahi because we lived in Afghanistan and there are Afghan Jews. And of course, Iran had Jews. So just, I don't know, that doesn't really clear it up, but it does give it another name, I guess, another tradition.
Yeah. And the other side of it is that at least the Jews in Turkey, we were protected by the Turkish government. So we only lost one member of my family to the Holocaust, and that's because he went to France. So we don't have that kind of hyper vigilance against anti-Semitism that I find that a lot of American Jews are much more at the edge of that, and sometimes harder to talk to about the issues. Hi, David. Yeah.
When you lived on the Princess Islands, was Zeki, was your father with you? And if so, did he feel comfortable in what was primarily a Turkish Jewish environment?
Yeah, I don't know if he felt comfortable, but he was greeted warmly by my mother's family. By then, everything had sort of faded away. After 12 years of not being talked to by either side of the family, my eldest sister, Ilhan, was born. You know Ilhan. And a telegram was sent to my mother's parents. You have a granddaughter, do you want to meet her? And for the first time in her life, my grandmother said, we are going, I don't care what you say. And there was a kind of rapprochement. And after that, my grandparents started to arrive here. We went back to visit my father's family, and slowly but surely there was not just better relations, but warm relations on both sides.
Before we leave the Sephardic-Ashkenazic dichotomy, maybe you know this, maybe other people know this, but it had been my understanding maybe 15, 20 years ago that there was a real political divide in Israel with respect to views of the peace process between the Ashkenazim on the one hand and the Sephardim on the other. And again, I may be 180 degrees wrong on this. It had been my understanding that the Ashkenazim were actually more likely to be sort of the peace now advocates compared to the Sephardim in Israel, which would, again, not contradict what you're saying, but it would be an interesting juxtaposition, because it sounds like what you're saying is The Ashkenazim would be more fearful of the Arabs, more conscious of the Holocaust, more paranoid, as some people would say. And yet, if what I said is true, again, if it's true, then it would make you wonder, well, why is that? So I wonder if you could comment on that. And I hope my facts aren't wrong. Maybe they are.
Well, I don't know. Were you going to say something?
The facts are correct. The peace movement in Israel is mostly Ashkenazi.
Mm-hmm.
And the right wing in Israel is heavily supported by the Mizrahim, which is the Arab Jews.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, as a primarily Ashkenazic Jew, there's no question whose food is better. I mean, there's absolutely no question. So, gefilte fish makes me ill. So, even my grandmother's gefilte fish.
Yeah, I don't know where that let's not go there.
Yeah.
I really don't know what to say about that. I do know that there are very few Sephardic Jews left in Turkey. After Turkey became a republic, the warmth and acceptance of the Ottoman Empire sort of gave way to a nationalism that happened after World War I. And because of that, the Jews in Turkey started to feel a kind of racism that really has not subsided. And the Sephardic Jews in my family who remember living in Turkey in the 1930s, 40s, 50s talk a lot about how they felt like the other. So it wasn't all, roses after the republic became. But in terms of how they feel about Israel, they're staunchly behind Israel, cannot discuss it. The Muslim side of my family is staunchly Palestinian, pro-Palestinian, won't discuss it. It's tough. Sorry?
You're the peacemaker.
They think I'm an idiot.
That is how what people say to peacemakers.
Right.
You are so naive.
Yeah, you're so naive. Pie in the sky dreamer. We're not dreamers. We're kind of sad because we can see where things need to go and how hard it's going to be to go there. Right? Yes, please.
You had mentioned that the Sephardic Jews were more similar to the Muslims than they were to the Ashkenazi
Mm-hmm.
culture. But then you also told the story of visiting with your mother's family, I believe, where you were dancing and they were wearing bikinis and stuff like that. So that seems a little bit...
Yeah.
So I was wondering, were they different?
They were different. They were different.
The rest of the Sephardic Jews? Because you said the Sephardic Jews in Turkey were more similar to the Muslims than
Right.
the Ashkenazi Jews, but then you painted a picture of the Jewish side of your family as, dancing and wearing bikinis.
Yes, yeah. Right. So, yeah, it's not a clear-cut picture. Yeah, they did wear bikinis, they did dance, and that was anathema to the Muslim population. They were much more cosmopolitan, they spoke different languages, they were still sort of in their own schools, their own synagogues, things like that. The part I'm talking about is sort of interpersonal relationships and the way we understand each other face to face. And that sort of thing I find very similar between the two cultures. Yes.
In the late 60s, well, 69 when you were there, did your peers, the other kids your age in the Jewish community on those islands, did they speak Ladino or Turkish or both?
The young people spoke Turkish. My grandmother did not speak Turkish. She spoke Bulgarian because they came from Sofia. My mother spoke Ladino to her sisters and to her parents. I grew up learning, I understood Ladino as a kid, and now I just went to a thing called a Visita where Sephardic Jews get together every month and they sort of have food together and sort of preserve Ladino culture. There was a woman speaking Ladino and I realized I understand Ladino much better than I understand Spanish, which was a complete shock to me. But it is a dying language. The young people sort of are forgetting it. Yes, please.
I'm happy to be here and hear your story. I'm Palestinian myself. I'm a Christian Palestinian and I'm married to an Ashkenazi Jew. And it's been going very strong for the last 26 years.
MashaAllah.
And we hope and wish that more people will take that track. But however, when we first decided we want to get married, Eve, I didn't believe that there are so many marriages between Palestinians and Jews in Israel, Palestine, call it what you will, what's in the name. And when she went there, she stayed with a very good friend of hers, and she found out that there were so many cases of happy marriages between the two sides, be it Muslim Jew, Christian Jew. But as to the point that you raised, as to why the Ashkenazi Jews now are in the peace camp, more so than the Mizrahi Jews, there have been lots of theories about that, and one of them is that at the foundation, when Israel was founded, of course it was founded by Ashkenazi Jews that came from Europe. And then they started the campaigns to bring in the Jews from the Arab countries, from Iraq, where they were living happily with Muslims for generations, as we heard in Spain they did, as well as in Turkey. And from Egypt and from Morocco. Even today, Moroccan Jews will never lose their nationality. They're still Moroccan. And I remember growing up in Jerusalem, the west side of Jerusalem, with a house shared with a Polish family. We were on the first floor. The second floor was with a Jewish family from Poland. So when these Mizrahi Jews came, they were probably second-class citizens in Israel. And their mothers and their wives were working for the Ashkenazis. Now that, of course, you have a third scapegoat, if you will, which is the Palestinians, a Mizrahi Jew would feel, why should I have peace with those Palestinians and then have to go back and serve again in an Ashkenazi household? So they are really the bulk of the Likud party, if you will. You have Salman Shalom from Tunisia, you have David Levy from Morocco, and you have many other Mizrahi Jews who are in the leadership of the Likud party. But anyway, I think the relationship between Muslims, Arabs, Jews is historical. We lived before together in peace, and we will live again in peace. If we have individuals who can just think that the leadership is leading us to where we are now, we cannot get to a peaceful resolution of this stuff. It's gone too long, and somebody should think seriously about, for the sake of the poor people. Anyway, this is my view.
Thank you.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. It's been my experience that the people in my family who have, the Jewish side, who have the most personal relationships with Muslim Turks in our circle of friends are the ones who are most tempered in the way they feel politically about the problems between Israel and Palestine. And I think that the key to all of this is long-term relationships between the two religions. And that has to be based not on just people sitting together and say, let's talk, but how about let's cook together, let's do art together, let's build something together. Those kinds of relationships, they knit together so that war becomes less possible. Yes.
I don't know if people here have been exposed to the news story leadership. Have you ever had them?
We actually had a JIDS news story leadership session.
That's amazing with the youth from Israel and Palestine.
Right.
And I think that sort of, they talk about that living together being so important, so that it's not just, there's so much is less about religion, it seems, than politics and power. And that's one of the reasons we have started this youth group, because the kids all focus on service, which all of our faiths agree on. And it was interesting because I was just talking to our son about his best friend who's Jewish, and do they ever talk about the Israeli-Palestinian thing? And it was really interesting to hear how they talk about it, and they talk about it in a very measured, respectful way. And his best friend's parents are very pro-Israel, and it's very hard to talk about it with them. And he said, well, don't tell his parents. But, this is, what he said, and it's really amazing how these young people who live together, play together, work together, can talk about it sometimes in ways that adults can't.
Yes.
Well, I have to respond to these words I've heard a couple of times, pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian. There is an alternative. It's called pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian.
Yeah.
So, because I get emails all the time with my involvement in the peace movement that all they do is bash Israel. And I'm sure there are others that I don't get because people know not to send them to me that simply bash the Palestinians. And we're trying to change that whole debate. But I wanted to move, at least temporarily, away from the politics and towards theology. You had mentioned the similarities, and I wrote it down: one God, social justice, and respect for family. And I got the impression that I got the impression, I guess, that the kids are not, I don't know how religious they're being raised in terms of devout. But one of the things that we have noticed at JIDS, I think, in a lot of our sessions, is that there are some subtle differences, but profound differences between at least the American Jewish mainstream community and the Muslim Jewish, the Muslim American mainstream community in terms of, say, whether people believe that Scripture is literally true, whether people believe that God did communicate to this messenger, or whether it's metaphorical.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, in a mixed marriage like the one that your parents had, how that came out. Because some of these differences in JIDS, you can see that's quite striking. Our first two sessions 3 years ago, or plus, right, were about God. And the line that I used to describe it is that at the end of the first session, all the Muslims thought the Jews were atheists, and all the Jews thought the Muslims were fundamentalists. And of course, that's an exaggeration. But it tells you how profoundly different, if you actually sat there and listened, the two groups sounded. And we thought, hey, we're talking about what we agree on.
Right.
We agree on God.
Right.
So if you can respond to that, I'd be very interested. Easy question.
I have to tell you that Sephardic Jews are Orthodox. There is no conservative or reformist. Sephardic Jews are all Orthodox. The women sit here, the men sit there. So in that sense, we talk about God a lot more and believe in God in a similar way to me to the ideas of Allah. I'm married to Bruce. I tell him he's an atheist, and he's confounded because he doesn't use God in his everyday speech. All day long I say, mashallah, inshallah, inshallah. God is all around everything that I do. And his idea of God is very different, and I really don't understand what it is. So in that sense, mine is much more similar to the Muslim view of God. And in the book, I go through a section about the Jewish side and how the concept of God at all is a Jewish concept. That without Jews, there would not be an idea of God. And the Prophet Muhammad spoke with Jews. I'm sure you know all of this stuff, I'm sure. That it was because of his understanding of what he learned from Jews that Islam developed, that Christianity developed. I mean, without the Jews and their understanding of this being, where would we all be? But I think it's the Muslims who fundamentally live, well, that's not a quip, but who fundamentally live every day with God, you know, on their shoulder, part of who they are every day. Wouldn't you agree with that? I mean, you. Like if you said, I'll see you at 2 o'clock, oh, inshallah, you know, if God says it's okay, I'll be there at 2 o'clock. Yes.
I just wanted to add a few words to your answer, Tim, because I think it's very revelatory, your response. I think that the contrast between the Jewish active members of JIDS the last few years and the Muslim active members of JIDS the last few years is not a difference between Islam and Judaism. It is in fact a difference between the current generation of Muslim Americans and the current generation of Jewish Americans who have now been heavily influenced by America and by American political and social understandings of the world. And that has tremendously changed Judaism for them. In Israel too, I agree 100%, in Israel too. That's where you get the Ashkenazi Sephardi split in Israel, and that's why I agree with you 100%. The Mizrahi Jews are much closer to the average Muslim today than they are to the average American Jew of Ashkenazi background today because of the influence of America. And it was in America that Reform, Reconstructionist, Renewal, and the other conservatives. There was another one I left out. And the conservative sects grew and became the majority. So we are reflecting a very different kind of Judaism in our generation than the current generation of American Muslims are, most of whom are first generation.
Ira, can I put my mother on the spot here for a second?
Sure.
I know you love this. Growing up in the Bronx in the early part of the 20th century, right? I mean, you think that if you want to call it atheism or if you want to call it questioning the traditional view of God, was that coming from America or was that coming from, you know, Eastern European, your parents' generation brought to these shores? It was, right? So I don't want to say your age, but I think she would know more about this because she's coming from the generation that primarily immigrated to the United States. And that was my understanding, is that it wasn't just the United States.
Well, it's not just the United States, because the Enlightenment hit the Jewish community
Correct.
very strong,
In Europe.
and it's happened there.
Correct.
And the people who came here tended to be the ones who were willing to leave the old world behind.
Right. That's right.
So,
That's
I mean,
right.
I agree that it began in Europe, but it really flowered here. There was
Wow.
still no conservative movement in Europe. There was still essentially no reform movement. There was something in Germany, but it was quite different. There was no Reconstructionist movement. There was no renewal movement. All of those were born in America.
They were social. A lot of these
Okay?
people were leftists.
I agree. They were born from they were born
Yes.
from left-wing social activists,
Right.
and what the Jews became that. But again, it was heavily grew up here.
Back to JIDS for a second,
Yeah.
and what Dan said. When you answered that in your family it's Orthodox, and that's more a belief in God and the Torah and so on. I'm adding Torah into that, of course it's part of it. For me, I think it's instructive to talk about Orthodox and probably conservative, because the conservative temple I go to, the rabbi would say God did talk to Moses. So, and Torah is profoundly important. So JIDS, and I think with JIDS, we have a lot of Reform Jews, Reconstructionists or whatever, and that split could be, it's more the Reform view of Judaism than the conservative and Orthodox view. And that's why you had that, oh, the Jews are atheists. So that would be my
I
reaction.
remember Haytham complained about the fact that he never hears God in sermons after going to the 15th conservative synagogue service, and said, "Don't you guys ever talk about God?"
Conservatives all over the map.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, along the same vein, from my point of view, American Jews are there's a very significant number of American Jews who identify culturally as Jews, but are not religious. That's certainly true in Israel too. They identify as Israelis, and they're secular. And we have the same kind of split, if you will, dichotomy. Non-believers or people for whom God doesn't inform their lives, but their cultural identity as Jews informs their lives.
Right.
Could you address the any secular tendencies that exist in Turkey that you're aware of in the Muslim world, and do you think that Muslims in general, my impression is that Muslims are becoming more religious rather than more culturally Muslim and less religious?
I think it depends on where you are, but clearly in Turkey, things are shifting. Turkey was absolutely secular when it became a republic. In the last 10 years, they say it's because of the influence of Iran, that girls are wearing more hijab and things like that. I don't think so. I think it's a pushback against modernity and getting lost in society and losing values. Does that answer the question, more or less?
It's a big question, and it requires one to be an armchair sociologist,
Right.
anthropologist, so to speak. But that's what I'm observing in terms of changes. More women wearing hijab throughout the Muslim world than used to, in cultures like Turkey that used to be very, very secular.
And I just want to add that in every nation state that I can see, religious leaders on the whole range are using the religion as a way to foment dissatisfaction. We are us, they are they, to promote their own agendas. And I've seen it everywhere. So, yes.
The Jews do that too.
Yes.
I was
Yeah,
gonna
the
say, I
Christians.
think in the case of not just Turkey, but where you're having, as you do in Turkey now, a more democratic political system, for the first time since the republic was created, it allows people to have a range of voting options that they never had before. And certainly I think in Turkey, it brings out, even after the 70-odd years of the republic, that in villages, smaller towns, and maybe even the bigger cities, a lot of people are now voting for the, in the case of Turkey, moderate
Islamic Party. Well, that was never an option before, as it
Right.
was never an option before in Egypt and other places like that.
Right.
So it's sort of a, if you want to say, be careful what you wish for type of thing. We want democracy as long as we, being the U.S., in the hope that people will vote the way we would like them to vote. And what we're finding very often, where people are really given those options, they're voting for the either moderately or less moderate Islamic parties in the Muslim world.
Right.
And just one other thing I wanted to mention about the more, let's say, liberal groups in Israel, and that is the kind of democratic liberalism that exists in Israel were brought in by the Ashkenazi out of Europe. You don't have that tradition within the Sephardic or the Mizrahi Jewish community. So the idea of pluralism and things like that tends to be ideas that derive from the European Jews and not the Sephardic or the Mizrahi Jews.
Oh, the reason I'm standing here is because I think my part of this is over and I'm really interested in the things that you say. So let me just say thank you very much for having me today, and we can just keep talking.
A few words about how you actually put this book together.
Okay, yeah.
They realize.
Okay, well, because I'm an architect, I write and I photograph and I draw and I do all that other stuff. So the book is mine. I put it together. I tried to find a publisher, and nobody would publish it the way I wanted. So I printed it in Canada, and I did all the recipes myself. My husband tasted every one of them. And if you see two hands in the photograph, that's because he's standing behind me.
He's still thin.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, he was standing behind me. I'd say, "You're getting the sink. Don't get the sink." And he was like a little tyrant about it. But so yes, I did the whole thing. Yes.
I have a question that may be more appropriate for Ira to answer. And I also have kind of another question for you. But before I ask those questions, someone mentioned New Story Leadership, and I just wanted to point out that the founder of New Story Leadership.
Can I thank you, and thank you for the commendation and the support. I've got a dash, but can you make sure I get a copy of the book and I'll pay you, or
sure.
Somebody?
I'll make sure.
Can I throw out an idea? Some of our host families, Ira and Susan, are host families here for the program. Some of them have fantastic kitchens.
Oh.
And I would love, if you were available next summer, I just suddenly got this idea of having our Israeli kids being taught how to cook some Palestinian dishes.
Oh, sure.
Palestinian kids being taught to cook some Israeli. To come and we'll plug your book and
yeah, I would be happy to come. Who should I sign your book to? And also, I don't make anything but Turkish food, but I can do Muslim Jewish food. Okay, but I have done demonstrations. I have done demonstrations of cooking and stuff. So
Just FYI, I think it's a fabulous idea. I should do it in my kitchen. But Palestinian and Israeli cooking is the same. Except for the Ashkenazi, who are really not Israeli cooking at all. Israeli cooking is...
yeah, yeah.
I just think food is so important. As I think that would be a great
For those of you who don't know, Paul Costello is the CEO of New Story Leadership, and a program that has been for 3 years now, bringing about 5 Israelis and 5 Palestinian young adults over to work together, usually in pairs as interns, either at Congress or at various NGOs, and they live with host families. When we were one of those families, and Paul runs the program.
Wonderful.
Paul, would you please share with everybody your new idea about the negotiating institute that you would love to be able to...
Paul Costello. Paul Costello.
I'll just say to Paul.
Sure.